The Independence moved through the Imperial weapons fire like it was flying through a light rain. Captain Steve Rogers stood calmly on his bridge, watching the massive alien warship ahead of them. The bridge was filled with quiet confidence as his crew worked at their stations. Lieutenant Amy Davis from the tactical station reported their weapons were having no effect on their shields. The alien energy beams were being absorbed by their defensive systems without any strain. Steve replied this was exactly as expected. The Earth Defense Force had been preparing for this moment for years. Chief Engineer Bob Peterson checked his instruments when Steve asked about the alien ship's status. Their technology was primitive compared to human standards. Basic energy weapons, simple shielding, and slow engines. They were like a horse trying to race a fighter jet. The technological gap was enormous. Steve nodded thoughtfully. The Earth Defense Force had been preparing for this moment for 5 years, ever since their deep space scouts had discovered the Galactic Empire's expansion toward human colonies. The reports had been disturbing. World after world had fallen to Imperial forces without any real resistance. Communications Officer Lisa Park announced they were receiving multiple transmissions from other Imperial ships in the system calling for reinforcements. The alien fleet was panicking. Steve asked how many ships were responding to the distress calls. Sensors showed 12 Imperial vessels converging on their position rapidly. The largest appeared to be twice the size of the ship they were currently facing. Steve walked to the center of the bridge. Through the main view screen, he could see the Imperial fleet gathering in defensive formation. Their ships were massive and intimidating, designed to strike fear into any species that saw them. The Empire had clearly built their fleet for psychological warfare as much as military effectiveness. The tactical display showed the Imperial ships moving into standard attack patterns. Steve recognized the formations from the intelligence reports. The Empire used the same tactics against every species they encountered. Overwhelming force and intimidation, followed by demands for surrender. Lisa reported an incoming transmission from the Imperial flagship. Steve ordered it put through. A new alien appeared on screen. This one was even larger than Admiral Krex, with elaborate armor and multiple weapons visible on his uniform. His appearance was designed to project absolute authority and power. The alien announced himself as Fleet Admiral Thorne, Supreme Commander of the Imperial 7th Fleet. He demanded immediate surrender or total destruction. His voice carried the absolute confidence of someone who had never lost a battle or even been seriously challenged. Steve studied the alien commander carefully. Like all the Imperial officers he had seen, Admiral Thorne spoke with the complete certainty of someone who had conquered dozens of worlds. The Empire had clearly never faced real resistance before. Steve replied calmly that he could not surrender as his mission was to liberate the worlds the Empire had illegally occupied. The alien's expression changed from confidence to anger and confusion. Admiral Thorne insisted it was impossible for a single ship to challenge the entire Imperial fleet. He demanded to know what species and empire Steve represented. Steve explained. He represented humanity, and the Admiral was about to learn why that should concern him. The alien's eyes widened at this response. Clearly, the Empire was not used to being threatened or challenged by anyone. Steve ended the transmission and turned to his crew. He ordered all stations to prepare for combat operations. Pete was to give full power to engines and weapons. Lisa was to send a message to Earth Command announcing the liberation of the Xerion system had begun. The Independence began accelerating toward the Imperial fleet. Steve could see the alien ships spreading out in their standard attack formation. They were following tactics that had worked against 47 other species. The Empire had become comfortable with their methods. Amy reported the Imperial ships were charging their weapons. Energy readings showed they were preparing to fire everything they had. Steve ordered her to target their flagship and fire when ready. It was time to show the Empire what human weapons could do. The Independence's main cannon fired once. A beam of brilliant blue energy shot across space faster than the aliens could track. The beam struck Admiral Thorne's flagship directly. The massive Imperial vessel, which had destroyed countless worlds, exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the entire system like a new star. The remaining Imperial ships stopped moving completely. Steve could imagine the shock and confusion on their bridges. They had just watched their most powerful ship destroyed by a single shot from an unknown vessel. Lisa announced they were receiving surrender requests from 6 Imperial vessels. The alien crews were abandoning their aggressive postures and begging for mercy. Steve told them to power down their weapons and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Peterson scanned for any ships trying to escape the system. 5 Imperial vessels were running toward the edge of the system at maximum speed. They were fleeing like frightened animals. Steve considered his options carefully. The escaping ships would report back to Imperial Command about this encounter. Soon, the entire Empire would know that an unknown species had destroyed their ships, with ease. Steve decided to let them go. He wanted the Empire to know they were coming. Amy asked why they would want that. Fear was a powerful weapon, and Steve intended to use it against the Empire. Steve smiled and explained the Empire's greatest weapon had always been fear. For 3 centuries, they had conquered worlds because everyone was afraid to fight back. When word spread that a single human ship had destroyed an entire Imperial fleet, that fear would start working against them instead. Lisa asked if the Empire would not send bigger fleets after them. Steve replied they probably would, but they did not understand something important about humans. The bigger the fight, the more determined humans became. The Empire was about to learn that threatening humanity was a serious mistake. On the view screen, Steve could see the remaining Imperial ships powering down their weapons. In the distance, the liberated planet Xerion Prime was already sending grateful messages. Their long nightmare of occupation was finally over. Lisa reported an incoming transmission from Xerion Prime. Steve ordered it put through. A blue-skinned alien with large eyes appeared on screen. Her voice was filled with emotion and hope for the first time in years. She identified herself as Governor Maya of Xerion Prime and explained her people had lived under Imperial occupation for 20 years. They had thought freedom was impossible. The Empire seemed too powerful to resist. She asked how they could thank the humans for this miracle. Steve replied they did not need thanks. Freedom was the basic right of every intelligent species in the galaxy. They were here to make sure she and her people kept that freedom. No species should live under the boot of tyrants. Governor Maya asked if they would stay to protect them. When the Empire learned what happened here, they would certainly send more ships. Her people were afraid the Empire would return with even greater force. Steve looked at his crew. They all knew the answer. He explained they could not stay to defend one world, but they would do something much better. They would make sure the Empire was too busy defending their own worlds to threaten hers again. The transmission ended. Steve turned to his navigation officer and ordered a course set for the Imperial manufacturing world of Kralin 5. It was time to show the Empire what happened when they threatened human colonies and enslaved innocent worlds. Navigator Jim Collins confirmed the course was set. As the Independents prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Steve looked at his crew with enormous pride. They were about to begin the most important mission in human history, liberating an entire galaxy from centuries of tyranny. Steve ordered Lisa to send one more message to Earth Command. They should tell them the Galactic Empire was about to learn what humanity was truly capable of when pushed too far. The Independents disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind a system that was free for the first time in decades. Behind them, Imperial survivors raced to warn their empire that something new and terrible was loose in the galaxy, something called humanity. Commander Zolth stood on the bridge of the Imperial battleship Dominator, watching the scanning displays with growing confusion. For 300 years, the Galactic Empire had controlled this sector of space. Every ship, every species, every technology was cataloged in their vast databases. Nothing moved through their territory without their knowledge. Until now. Scanner Technician Vorth reported with worry in his voice. The unknown vessel was still approaching at speeds that should be impossible for any known ship design. Zolth moved to the main display. The object on screen looked unlike anything in Imperial records. It was sleek and white with strange blue lights running along its hull. Most disturbing of all, it was moving at speeds that violated everything the Empire knew about space travel. Zolth asked if all databases had been checked. Fourth confirmed they had searched through records of every species in the Empire. This ship design did not exist in any archive. The technology readings made no sense either. Admiral Krex entered the bridge, his forearms moving nervously. As the sector commander, he had never encountered anything the Empire could not identify. He demanded a status report. Zolth explained. They had detected an unknown vessel moving through their space at impossible speeds. The ship appeared to be heading toward their main supply depot on Zerion Prime. Admiral Krex studied the display. The Empire had conquered 47 different species over the centuries. Each conquest had been easy because the Empire always knew exactly what they were facing. Superior intelligence gathering was their greatest weapon. Krex asked if they had attempted communication. Vorth confirmed they had tried all known frequencies with no response. The unknown ship continued its approach. Its speed was now reading at levels that should have torn any normal vessel apart. Yet the ship moved, smoothly, as if the laws of physics did not apply to it. Vorth reported energy signatures that did not match any known power source. The readings were strange. The ship appeared to be using multiple types of energy simultaneously: nuclear fusion, antimatter, and something else they could not identify. It was like they combined technologies from different evolutionary paths. Admiral Krex felt a chill run through his body. In 3 centuries of expansion, the Empire had learned that species developed technology in predictable patterns. You either mastered energy weapons or projectile weapons, but not both. You either developed faster than light travel through dimensional folding or through space compression, never both. This ship seemed to ignore those rules completely. Zolth announced the vessel had just changed course. It was now heading directly for their position. Krex ordered battle stations and charged all weapons. The Dominator was one of the Empire's most powerful warships. Its weapons could destroy entire planets. Surely this unknown vessel, whatever it was, would not dare to challenge them. The communications officer announced they were receiving a transmission. Krex ordered it put through. The main screen changed to show the interior of the unknown ship's bridge. Admiral Krex stared in shock at what he saw. The beings on the bridge looked similar to several species the Empire had conquered, but they were clearly different. They had pale skin, strange hair colors, and wore uniforms unlike anything in Imperial records. One of them, apparently their leader, stepped forward. He was tall, with dark hair and calm eyes that showed no fear of the massive Imperial warship. He identified himself as Captain Steve Rogers of the Earth vessel Independence. He stated they were in violation of the Galactic Peace Accord and demanded immediate withdrawal from the Zerion system. Admiral Krex was speechless. Galactic Peace Accord? Earth? These terms meant nothing to him. More importantly, this Captain Rogers was giving orders to the Galactic Empire as if he had the authority to do so. Krex identified himself as Admiral of the Galactic Empire and demanded the beings identify their species and homeworld immediately. Captain Rogers smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. He explained his species was called human and their homeworld was Earth. They were here to shut down the illegal occupation of independent worlds. The transmission ended. Admiral Krex stared at the blank screen, his mind racing. Humans? Earth? These names appeared in no Imperial database. How could an entire species and homeworld be completely unknown to the Empire? Zolth reported the human ship was accelerating, again, and moving directly toward them. Krex ordered all weapons to fire at will. The Dominator unleashed its full arsenal. Energy beams that could melt through any known armor shot toward the human vessel. For a moment, Admiral Krex thought the problem was solved. Then he watched in horror as the human ship's shields absorbed every shot without even slowing down. It was impossible. Nothing could withstand their weapons. The human ship continued its approach, moving faster than anything the Empire had ever seen. Admiral Krex realized that for the first time in 3 centuries, the Galactic Empire faced an enemy they knew nothing about, and that enemy was not afraid of them. Imperial Central Command was in complete chaos. Admiral Supreme Vex, leader of the entire Galactic Empire military, stood in the main war room surrounded by holographic displays showing disaster reports from across the galaxy. Red warning lights flashed constantly as more reports came in. He ordered his intelligence chief to report immediately. Commander Nix activated the main display with shaking hands. In the past week, they had lost contact with 17 Imperial bases, 8 major manufacturing worlds, and 36 occupation fleets. The losses were unprecedented in Imperial history. Vex demanded to know how they had lost contact. The reports were confusing and often contradictory. Commander Nix explained that the attacks followed the same terrifying pattern everywhere. A single unknown vessel appeared without warning, ignored all demands for surrender, and destroyed their forces with weapons they could not identify or defend against. Admiral Supreme Vex studied the tactical reports with growing horror. The unknown ship, this Independence, was moving through Imperial space like a force of nature. Every world it visited was liberated from Imperial control. Every fleet it encountered was completely destroyed. The ship seemed unstoppable. Vex asked if they had learned anything useful about these humans. Nix replied they had learned very little. Intelligence gathering had become almost impossible. They appeared to be a previously unknown species from a world called Earth. Their technology was far beyond anything in their databases. Vex insisted it was impossible. Their intelligence network covered the entire galaxy. They had files on every known species and every technological development. How could an entire species develop advanced technology without their knowledge? The Empire prided itself on knowing everything that happened in their territory. Commander Nix looked uncomfortable as he explained their analysis. Their best scientists believed the humans had developed in an area of space they had classified as too dangerous to explore. Earth was located in what they called the Chaos Sector, an area with unstable stars, dangerous radiation, and hostile environmental conditions. They had assumed no intelligent life could survive there. Admiral Supreme Vex felt a chill of understanding run through his entire body. The Empire had avoided the Chaos Sector for very good reasons. The area was known for destroying ships and killing exploration teams. Any species that could survive and thrive in such conditions would be far tougher than the civilized worlds the Empire usually conquered. The communications officer announced an incoming priority transmission from Fleet, Admiral Krex. Vex ordered it put through immediately. Admiral Krex appeared on the main screen. His ship looked badly damaged and his expression was filled with fear and confusion. Krex reported that the human vessel had entered the core systems and destroyed the main Imperial shipyards at Nexus Prime. Vex felt his blood freeze in his veins. Nexus Prime was the Empire's primary ship construction facility, heavily defended by their most powerful fleets and orbital weapons platforms. Vex asked how many ships had been lost in the defense. Krex replied with a broken voice that all of them were gone. Every single ship and defense platform had been destroyed. The humans had technology that made their best weapons completely useless. They moved faster than their ships could track, and their shields could absorb anything they fired at them. Vex asked for the human ship's current position. Krex reported with terror that they were heading directly for the Imperial capital world. The heart of the Empire itself was under threat. Admiral Supreme Vex realized that the Empire faced its first real crisis in 3 centuries. This single, human ship was systematically destroying everything the Empire had built over generations of conquest. Their military superiority was being shattered by an enemy they knew nothing about. Vex ordered all available fleets to converge on the capital, immediately. Every ship in the Empire was to defend the homeworld at all costs. Commander Nix pointed out this would leave all their other territories completely undefended. Rebellions would certainly break out across the Empire. Vex replied, it did not matter anymore. If they lost the capital, the Empire would fall anyway. Everything they had built would collapse. The capital contained the central command systems that controlled their entire military and government. Meanwhile, on the Independence, Captain Rogers was reviewing detailed intelligence reports about the Imperial capital world. The planet was the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. Orbital weapons platforms, defensive fleets, and ground-based shields made it nearly impregnable. Amy reported their long-range sensors showed massive fleet movements throughout Imperial space. It looked like they were pulling ships from across the entire Empire to defend their homeworld. The mobilization was enormous. Steve asked how many ships they were talking about. Amy's voice showed amazement as she reported over 3,000 vessels. It was the largest fleet in recorded galactic history. The Empire was throwing everything they had at this one battle. Chief Peterson looked up from his engineering station and pointed out that, even with their significant technological advantages, fighting 3,000 ships at once might be genuinely challenging. The numbers were overwhelming. Steve walked to the main view screen, which showed the Imperial capital world ahead of them. It was a massive planet covered in gleaming cities and orbital defense platforms. The sight was impressive and intimidating. Steve acknowledged that Pete was right about fighting 3,000 ships being difficult. That was exactly why they were not going to fight them in a traditional battle. They had a much better strategy in mind. Amy asked what he meant by that. Steve asked what the one thing the Empire feared most was. Amy suggested being defeated in battle. Steve said no. The Empire feared something much worse than military defeat. They feared their subject species learning that the Empire could be defeated. For 3 centuries, the Empire had ruled through intimidation and fear. They had convinced billions of beings across the galaxy that resistance was hopeless. The Empire seemed too powerful and too advanced to challenge. Steve pointed to the tactical display showing Imperial fleet movements. The Empire was pulling every ship they had to defend one single world. That meant thousands of occupied planets were now completely undefended for the first time in centuries. Understanding dawned on Amy's face. Steve wanted to broadcast their attack on the capital to every world in the Empire. He was not just planning a military victory, but a psychological one that would inspire rebellion across the galaxy. Steve confirmed this was exactly right. When every species in the galaxy saw a single human ship attack the Imperial capital, they would realize the Empire was not invincible. The fear that had kept them enslaved would be broken forever. Lisa announced an incoming transmission from the Imperial capital. Steve ordered it put through. Admiral Supreme Vex appeared on screen. He was clearly trying to project authority and confidence, but Steve could see the fear and desperation in his eyes. Vex identified himself as Admiral Supreme and military commander of the Galactic Empire. He demanded immediate surrender, or they would face the combined might of 3,000 Imperial warships. His threat sounded hollow and desperate. Steve studied the alien leader carefully and identified himself as Captain Steve Rogers of Earth. He had a simple message for the Empire. The age of Imperial tyranny was finally over. Vex insisted they were just one ship against 3,000 and demanded surrender for a quick death. Steve replied that the Admiral still did not understand what was really happening. This was not about one ship against 3,000. This was about showing every oppressed species in the galaxy that they did not have to be afraid anymore. Steve ended the transmission and turned to his communications officer. He ordered Lisa to open a channel to every communication system in the galaxy. He wanted every world to see what happened next. This moment would change galactic history forever. Lisa confirmed the channel was open to the entire galaxy. Steve faced the camera. Behind him, the bridge of the Independence showed calm, confident humans preparing for the battle that would liberate the galaxy. Steve addressed every species watching the transmission. He identified himself as Captain Steve Rogers of the human species. Today, the Galactic Empire's reign of terror would finally end. Today, every world would learn that freedom was not just possible, but inevitable. He turned to his crew and ordered all stations to battle ready. It was time to show the galaxy what humanity could accomplish. The Independence accelerated toward the Imperial capital, while across the galaxy, billions of beings watched to see if freedom was really possible after 3 centuries of oppression. 1 week after the Battle of the Imperial capital, Captain Steve Rogers stood in the conference room of the Independence, meeting with representatives from dozens of newly liberated worlds. The ship was now orbiting Xerion Prime, which had become the temporary headquarters for organizing the new galactic government. Elder Zara of Altair 7 said they needed to discuss the massive power vacuum left by the Empire's sudden collapse. She had traveled here to represent the interests of all the former Imperial subjects. The transition to freedom was proving more complicated than anyone had expected. Hive leader Clix of the Vegan Crystal Worlds added that the Empire had provided structure and order, even if they disagreed completely with their brutal methods. Without them, how would they prevent chaos from spreading across the galaxy? Steve looked around the conference table at the representatives of 47 different species. Each had their own concerns, their own unique cultures, and their own ideas about how the galaxy should be governed. The diversity was both inspiring and challenging. Steve replied, that was exactly the right question to ask, but the answer should not come from him alone. It should come from all of them working together, as equals. Democracy required participation from everyone. Governor Maya of Zerion Prime activated a holographic display showing the entire galaxy. The problem was coordination on a massive scale. They had thousands of worlds that needed to establish trade, agreements, communication protocols, and defense arrangements. The Empire had handled all of this through force and fear. How would they accomplish it through cooperation? Steve smiled thoughtfully. This was the challenge he had expected and prepared for. It was relatively easy to destroy a tyrannical empire. Building something better and more lasting was much harder work. Steve explained that on Earth they had learned that freedom required responsibility. Each world had the right to govern itself, but also the responsibility to respect the rights of other worlds. Freedom without responsibility led to chaos. Representative Thax from the mining worlds of the Outer Rim asked what happened when worlds disagreed about important issues. The Empire had settled disputes by sending warships and making threats. What was the democratic alternative to force? Before Steve could answer, Lieutenant Amy Davis entered the conference room and reported an urgent message from Earth Command. Steve excused himself for a moment to receive the private transmission in a secure channel. Admiral Janet Mills, head of Earth Defense Command, appeared on the small screen. She congratulated Steve on successfully liberating the galaxy. Earth was incredibly proud of what he and his crew had accomplished. Steve thanked her, but said he thought the real work was just beginning. Destroying the Empire had been the easy part compared to what came next. Mills said that was exactly why she was calling. They had been monitoring communications across the former Empire carefully. While most worlds were celebrating their freedom, some were having serious problems adjusting to independence. Steve frowned and asked what kind of problems they were seeing. Mills explained there were three main issues developing. First, some worlds did not know how to govern themselves after centuries of imperial rule. Second, there were criminal organizations moving into systems where imperial law enforcement was completely gone. Third, and most concerning, there were reports of a faction of imperial loyalists gathering in the outer territories. Steve asked how serious the loyalist threat really was. Mills replied they had captured several former imperial weapons facilities and were building a new fleet. Their leader was calling himself True Emperor and claimed he would restore the Empire to its former glory. Steve sighed deeply. He had hoped that defeating the Empire would end the conflict, but history showed that overthrowing tyrants was often easier than building lasting peace. Steve asked what Earth's official recommendations were. Mills explained the President and the Defense Council had discussed this extensively. They were prepared to help establish a galactic defense force to maintain peace and protect the new democracies. But it had to be truly galactic, not just humans imposing their will on others. Steve nodded and said he understood completely. They had liberated these worlds to give them freedom, not to replace one empire with another. Earth would not become the new imperial capital. Mills confirmed this was exactly right. Steve's next mission was even more important than his first. He needed to help these species build a government that protected everyone's rights while preventing the return of tyranny. The transmission ended and Steve returned to the conference table. The representatives were still discussing the enormous challenges of governing a free galaxy. Steve announced he had just received some important information from Earth. Earth was prepared to help establish a galactic defense force to protect their freedom, but only if all species participated as complete equals. Elder Zara looked interested and asked what this defense force would actually do. Steve explained three main functions. First, help worlds establish democratic governments. Second, provide security against criminals and pirates. Third, defend against any attempts to restore Imperial rule. Hive leader Clix asked with concern if he was saying the Empire might actually return. Steve confirmed that a faction of Imperial loyalists was gathering strength in the outer territories. They were calling themselves the True Empire and building a new fleet of warships. The conference room erupted in worried discussions. The representatives had barely begun to enjoy their freedom, and already it was under serious threat. Governor Maya asked what Steve recommended they do. Steve stood up and activated the galactic display. He recommended they do what humans did best, work together to solve the problem. He pointed to different areas of the galaxy. Each species brought unique strengths to the alliance. The Altarians had the best diplomatic traditions in the galaxy. The Vegans had advanced sensor technology. The Zerionians understood logistics and supply management. Representative Thax pointed out they had never worked together as equals before. The Empire had always told them what to do. Steve replied then it was time to learn something new. The True Empire was counting on them being too divided and inexperienced to stop them. They should prove them wrong. Elder Zara stood up and announced, Altair 7 committed to joining this galactic defense force. Their diplomatic corps would help negotiate agreements between worlds. One by one, other representatives stood and pledged their world's support. Within an hour, the foundation of a new galactic government was taking shape. Steve said this was excellent progress, but reminded them this was not about following Earth or following him. This was about all of them working together to protect freedom for everyone. Governor Maya activated her communicator and called an emergency session of all liberated worlds. They needed to elect a galactic council and begin organizing their defenses immediately. As the representatives began planning their new government, Steve felt both enormous pride and deep concern. The easy part was definitely over. Now came the real test. Could dozens of different species with different cultures and interests work together to preserve their hard-won freedom? Outside the conference room windows, he could see ships from many different worlds arriving at Zerion Prime. The galaxy was coming together in a way it never had before in recorded history. But somewhere in the outer territories, the True Empire was also gathering strength, preparing to reclaim what they saw as their rightful dominion over the galaxy. The battle for freedom had been won. Now the battle to keep it was about to begin. 3 months after the formation of the Galactic Council, the Independents flew at the head of the largest fleet in galactic history. But unlike the Imperial fleets of the past, this one was made up of ships from dozens of different worlds, all united in their commitment to defend freedom. Captain Steve Rogers stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display showing the True Empire's stronghold in the Omega sector. Intelligence reports indicated that the Imperial loyalists had rebuilt their fleet to nearly 1,000 ships and were preparing to begin reconquering the galaxy systematically. Lisa reported an incoming transmission from the Galactic Council, Flagship Unity. Steve ordered it put through. The screen showed the bridge of the Unity where Admiral Sarah Torres, the newly elected military commander of the Galactic Defense Force, stood beside representatives from dozens of worlds. Admiral Torres announced their combined fleet was ready for the final battle. She was a former Earth defense officer who had been chosen to lead the new galactic fleet because of her extensive experience working with multiple species. Steve requested a complete status report. Torres replied, they had 2,000 ships from 47 different worlds. The Altarians were providing diplomatic support and intelligence. The Vegans had their sensor networks perfectly coordinated. The Zerionians were managing their supply lines efficiently. Every species was contributing their unique strengths to the alliance. Steve felt enormous pride in what the galaxy had accomplished in just 3 months. The new Galactic Council had managed to organize a military force larger than anything the Old Empire had ever assembled. Amy reported an incoming transmission from the True Empire. Steve said they should hear what they had to say. A familiar figure appeared on screen, Admiral Supreme Vex, who had somehow escaped after the fall of the Imperial capital. But now he wore new insignia and called himself True Emperor Vex. Vex announced that Captain Rogers had made a grave mistake. He had destroyed order and replaced it with chaos. The galaxy needed Imperial rule to function properly. Different species could not govern themselves effectively. Steve replied that the galaxy was functioning far better than it ever did under the Empire. Free worlds were trading peacefully, sharing technology, and solving problems through cooperation, instead of conquest. Vex sneered that these were temporary illusions. Different species could not work together without a strong hand to guide them. Their alliance would collapse when faced with real military pressure. Steve said they would see about that. Vex's expression grew cold and threatening. Indeed they would. He had rebuilt the Imperial fleet with new ships and new weapons. This time, they would not underestimate human technology. The transmission ended, and Steve turned to his crew. Around them, the massive galactic fleet began moving toward the True Empire's position. Steve asked Amy what their sensors were showing. The True Empire fleet was emerging from the Omega Nebula. 900 ships and their energy signatures were different from the old Imperial technology. Steve asked how they were different. Chief Peterson checked his engineering displays and reported it looked like they had been studying the wreckage from their previous battles. They had tried to upgrade their weapons to counter human technology. Steve nodded grimly. He had expected this development. The True Empire had learned from their defeats and adapted their tactics. This battle would be more challenging than the previous ones. Steve ordered all ships to battle formation and told Admiral Torres to begin the attack. The Galactic Defense Force fleet moved forward in perfect coordination. Ships from dozens of worlds worked together with a precision that would have been impossible under the old Empire. Amy reported the True Empire fleet was firing. The space between the two fleets filled with energy beams and missile trails. The True Empire's new weapons were indeed more powerful than their previous technology. Amy observed they were concentrating their fire on their non-human ships. It appeared they believed human technology was superior, and they were trying to eliminate their allies first. Steve saw the strategy immediately. Vex was trying to prove that the Galactic Alliance was weak by destroying the non-human ships and leaving only the humans to fight. Steve ordered Admiral Torres to have all human ships move to protect their allies. Torres confirmed the order and announced human ships were forming defensive screens around Allied vessels. For the next hour, the battle raged across the Omega sector. The True Empire's upgraded weapons proved effective against many of the Allied ships, but they had not accounted for one crucial factor: the willingness of different species to protect each other. Amy pointed to her tactical display and told Steve to look at something amazing. Steve watched as an Altarian ship positioned itself between a True Empire dreadnought and a damaged Vegan vessel. The Altarian ship took heavy damage protecting their ally. Similar scenes were playing out across the battlefield. Species that had been enemies under the Empire were now risking their lives to save each other. Lisa announced True Emperor Vex was transmitting again. Steve ordered it put through. Vex appeared on screen, but his confident demeanor was cracking. This was impossible. Different species could not fight together effectively. They should be breaking apart under pressure. Steve replied that was where Vex was completely wrong. The Empire had ruled through fear and division. The Galactic Defense Force fought with trust and cooperation. Vex insisted it would not last. When the casualties mounted, their alliance would crumble like all alliances did. Steve told him to watch and learn. Steve ended the transmission and opened a channel to all ships in the Galactic Fleet. He announced they fought not just for victory, but for the future of galactic civilization. Every species here had chosen freedom over tyranny, cooperation over conquest. They should show the True Empire what that choice meant. The response was immediate and inspiring. Ships from every world in the Alliance began coordinating their attacks with new determination. The Altarians used their diplomatic skills to organize perfect unit coordination. The Vegans shared sensor data that allowed precise targeting. The Zerionians managed logistics that kept every ship supplied and ready. Within 2 hours, the True Empire fleet was defeated. Emperor Vex's flagship was captured and the last remnant of Imperial tyranny was finally eliminated forever. Amy reported they were receiving surrender signals from all remaining True Empire ships. Steve looked at the tactical display showing the remnants of the Imperial fleet. It was over. The galaxy was truly free. Steve told Admiral Torres to accept their surrender, but reminded her their goal was not to punish them, but to show them that freedom worked better than tyranny. 6 months later, Steve stood on the observation deck of the Independence, now docked at the new Galactic Council headquarters on Unity Station. Through the windows he could see ships from hundreds of worlds coming and going, conducting peaceful trade and diplomacy. The Galactic Council had established universities where different species shared their knowledge. Former imperial worlds were learning to govern themselves democratically. Trade routes that had once been controlled by imperial monopolies were now open to all species. Lisa announced an incoming message from Earth. Steve ordered it put through. Admiral Mills appeared, on the screen, smiling broadly. The president wanted to know when he was coming home. Earth was planning a celebration. Steve looked out at the bustling space station, where beings from dozens of worlds worked together in ways that would have been impossible under the Empire. Steve told the Admiral to tell the president that he was home. Humanity's home was not just Earth anymore. It was anywhere in the galaxy where beings could live free. Mills said Steve had accomplished something remarkable. He had not only liberated the galaxy, he had helped it learn to govern itself. Steve replied he thought the galaxy had taught him more than he had taught it. Humans were strong, but they were stronger when they worked with others who shared their values. As the transmission ended, Steve felt a deep satisfaction. The mission that had begun with a single ship facing impossible odds had ended with an entire galaxy learning to protect its own freedom. The Galactic Empire had fallen, not because humanity was superior to other species, but because all species working together were superior to tyranny. The age of freedom had truly begun. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, billions of beings stopped what they were doing to watch the impossible sight on their communication screens. A single ship was approaching the Imperial capital, defended by the largest fleet in galactic history. The moment seemed like madness or miracle. On the world of Altair 7, the blue-skinned Altarians gathered in public squares to watch the transmission. They had been conquered by the Empire 60 years ago and had never seen anyone challenge Imperial power successfully. Elder Zara, leader of the Altarian resistance, asked if this was really happening. One ship against the entire Imperial fleet? Her aide replied the humans must be insane. No species could possibly be that powerful. On the crystal worlds of the vegan system, the insectoid vegans watched with their compound eyes fixed on the screens. Their world had been enslaved for 40 years, forced to mine precious crystals for Imperial technology. Hive leader Click suggested perhaps the humans had allies hiding nearby in space. The technician replied their sensors showed only one ship. Either the humans were incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. On the Independence, Captain Rogers could feel the enormous weight of galactic history on his shoulders. Every world in the Empire was watching this moment. If he failed, it would crush the hope of billions of oppressed beings across the galaxy. Amy reported the Imperial fleet was moving into defensive formation around their capital world. 3,000 ships in multiple layers of protection. The formation was perfect and should stop any attacking force in the galaxy. Steve studied the tactical display carefully. The Imperial fleet formation was indeed perfect. A textbook, defensive strategy that should stop any attacking force known to galactic military science. But they were not facing conventional tactics. Steve asked Pete about the status of their special systems. All systems were green and ready. The new prototype weapons were fully charged and ready for testing. Steve smiled with satisfaction. The Independence was not just another Earth defense ship. It was humanity's first warship designed specifically for liberating an entire galaxy. It carried technology that even the Empire could not imagine or understand. Steve ordered Jim to take them into the heart of the Imperial formation. Navigator Jim Collins looked nervous and pointed out that would put them within range of every weapon the enemy had. Steve replied that was exactly where he wanted to be. The Independence began accelerating toward the massive Imperial fleet. As it approached, Admiral Supreme Vex gave the order every being in the galaxy was waiting to hear. All ships were to fire everything they had. 3,000 Imperial warships opened fire simultaneously. The space around the Independence filled with deadly energy beams, plasma bolts, and explosive missiles. It was enough concentrated firepower to destroy entire solar systems. The display was terrifying and beautiful. For a moment, the Independence disappeared completely inside a ball of destructive energy. Across the galaxy, billions of beings held their breath. Had the humans been destroyed? Had the Empire's massive firepower finally stopped the impossible ship? Then the energy cleared, and the Independence emerged completely undamaged. Not a single mark showed on its hull. The shields had absorbed the attack of 3,000 ships without even flickering. On Altair 7, Elder Zara gasped in amazement. Their shields had absorbed everything. How was that even possible? The Empire's weapons could destroy planets. On the Vegan crystal worlds, Hive leader Clix felt hope for the first time in decades. The humans had technology far beyond Imperial understanding. Perhaps freedom was really possible. On the Independence bridge, Steve remained completely calm as damage reports came in. Pete reported no damage to any system. The Imperial weapons could not even scratch their new armor. The technological gap was even larger than they had expected. Steve ordered Amy to return fire and show the Empire what human weapons could do. It was time to demonstrate that humanity had not come to negotiate. The Independence fired a single shot from its main cannon. The beam of brilliant blue energy passed through the Imperial fleet like a sword cutting through paper. In its path, 50 Imperial warships simply ceased to exist. They did not explode or burn. They simply disappeared from existence. Admiral Supreme Vex stared in complete horror at his tactical display. 50 of his most powerful ships had been destroyed by one shot from the human vessel. Ships that had conquered worlds were gone in an instant. Commander Nix checked his instruments frantically. The human weapon used principles they did not understand at all. It appeared to manipulate matter at the atomic level, breaking the bonds that held atoms together. Vex ordered continued firing and all ships to concentrate everything on that vessel. The Imperial fleet fired again, pouring every weapon they had at the single human ship. Again, the Independence absorbed the massive attack without any damage. Steve ordered Amy to disable their flagship rather than destroy it. Another blue beam shot from the Independence. This time, instead of destroying Admiral Vex's ship, it simply shut down all its systems. The massive flagship went dark and began drifting helplessly through space. The communications officer announced weakly that the human vessel was transmitting again. Steve's face appeared on screens throughout the Imperial fleet and across the entire galaxy. Steve gave Admiral Vex a final warning. He was to order all Imperial forces to withdraw from occupied worlds immediately, or Steve would destroy every ship in their fleet. The choice was theirs to make. From his darkened bridge, Admiral Vex felt 3 centuries of Imperial confidence crumbling around him. No species had ever spoken to the Empire this way. No one had ever had the power to make such demands and back them up with force. Vex said into his communicator that this was impossible. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries. They could not destroy everything they had built over generations of conquest. Steve replied that the Admiral should watch and learn what was possible. The Independence began moving through the Imperial fleet like a shark swimming among fish. Each shot from its weapons destroyed multiple ships. The human vessel moved so fast that Imperial gunners could not even track it. Within minutes, half the Imperial fleet was gone. The most powerful military force in galactic history was being systematically destroyed by a single ship. On worlds across the galaxy, oppressed beings watched in amazement as the impossible became reality. The mighty Galactic Empire, which had seemed invincible for centuries, was being defeated before their eyes. Elder Zara whispered on Altair 7 that this changed everything they thought they knew. Hive leader Clix said on the Vegan worlds that the Empire could actually be defeated. Similar conversations were happening on thousands of planets. For the first time in centuries, beings across the galaxy began to believe that freedom was not just a dream. On the Independence, Steve watched as the remaining Imperial ships began to retreat in complete disorder. Amy reported the Imperial fleet was withdrawing and Admiral Vex was requesting terms for surrender. Steve ordered Vex put through. Admiral Vex appeared on screen, his proud demeanor completely broken. He announced the Galactic Empire formally surrendered. They would withdraw from all occupied worlds immediately. Steve nodded and gave Admiral Vex 48 hours to begin withdrawing from all non-Imperial worlds. Any delay would result in the complete destruction of their remaining fleet. The Empire's reign of terror was officially over. The transmission ended and Steve turned to address the galaxy once more. He told every species watching that they were now free. The Empire's reign of terror was finished forever. They had the right to govern themselves, to live in peace, and to determine their own destiny. Across the galaxy, celebrations began on thousands of worlds as beings realized that after 3 centuries of oppression, they were finally free. The single human ship had done what entire civilizations thought impossible. It had liberated the galaxy and shown that freedom was always possible for those brave enough to fight for it.